Start recording. Ta-da! Okay, right. So I think this is lesson 6 now, isn't it? So last week I talked about atmospheric perspective and the different parts of it that help us to create perspective where there isn't linear perspective, such as in a landscape and things. So about getting the sense of space in a picture by using things such as texture, colour and tone and shadow within a picture to help us be drawn through the space that we're creating on the flat plane when we're painting. However, though, we are doing cities and crowds and things like that. So we will be looking at obviously architecture combined with crowds of people, which was another one of our themes that we're looking at. Last lesson I spent some time drawing from another artist's work. I'd chosen this artist because it had like blurry details and beautiful lights and then some stronger colour in the foreground. I did, however, just say, right, we're going to draw it out this lesson using pencil. So I spent most of that lesson drawing it in pencil. And then this week I've applied some colour and started to add acrylic paint over the top of it. So we're going to have a look at that. So I'm just going to remind you of what some of the things I showed you, just to sort of jog your memory a bit. So we'll go over there. There we go. All right. So you'll remember all of these, I think, from last week. And there was a worksheet on the drive that explains things a little bit more. But this is quite an interesting illustration about tone. Because you've got the darker tones in the foreground, and then as you go back in the city you can see how things get a little bit lighter, so that gives us this sense of space using tonal values. And then first of all, I think I mentioned Leonardo da Vinci's Mona Lisa and how the details in the foreground, again, they're very dark, so on Mona Lisa herself. And in the landscape, it's a bit darker where things are closer, and then it gets more blurry and less distinct as you go to the back. So it creates this lovely sense of space. And then I had these two pictures from Monet. So the beautiful reflections of the water are much darker, and you can see how they get lighter as they go further back as well. And also up here, the stronger, more vivid colours in this area with the yellow and greens and the reds just up there on the left hand side. And then as you go back, the colours are still warm, but a little bit more sort of bluey. And then further back, right into the background, you've got very pale colours in blue as well. So different ways and techniques of creating perspective. And these two pictures over here, obviously they're using linear perspective, which is what we looked at first with the single point perspective that we looked at after looking at 2-point perspective. So the thing that I started to work on next was looking at these over here. So let me just see if I can grab it. I can't grab it. That's good because I've locked it. That's good. So I chose to turn my photograph into black and white so that I could illustrate the tones within the image. So we've got the really dark, the girl and the boy and the lady running across or walking very quickly across there, really dark. We've got a sense of light with the shadows falling on the floor, and then and the details are fairly, clear, but it gives this sort of hazy atmosphere, maybe late in the day or early in the morning, going to work or going to school and so forth. And then towards the back of the picture, you can see how the tones become much more faded, so that you get this sense of space and also less distinct again. Now with the colour though, we're talking about how we can make this sense of space with the picture. So you can see how the colours in the foreground are much more vivid, as I said with the Monet one just a few minutes ago. So you've got these nice blues and reds on that man's jacket. The post is darker, but you've got the red on the traffic light, and the building in the foreground is much more darker and brighter and things. And then as we go towards the back, we've got these lovely pale blues. So I'm working on that today using the acrylics. Now, this picture, I think, I suspect it may have been painted first with a brown underneath, and then the blues and all the other colours applied on the top. But I decided that for my version of this, I was going to use a blue background over the whole of the drawing you saw me do last week, and then start to apply the highlights mainly onto the picture so that I could pick out those details quickly. So I'll go over to my desk. So as you can see, I've got a little way with it. So you can see the difference. This is my colour copy that I printed off on my printer, and you can see how different the colours are, and that's just purely to do with the printing. And if we go over to the version that I've got on here, you can see just how strong those colours are. It might also be a little bit to do with my computer screen. But over here, look, you can see how my version is coming along. Now, what you should try and perhaps do first is decide on what background colour you would like your picture to be done in. And the main thing you want to be to think about is obviously what's going on in the picture, the atmospheric perspective and so forth, but also if you apply a colour that is a mid-tone over the whole of the picture, so neither too dark or too light, then you're going to be able to go slightly darker, like I'm doing here with this chap, and started to do just here with the lady, and I've started to do with the lamppost. That will show up quite nicely against the blue. You're always going to, the colour that you put on is going to be affected by the blue in the background, so you're going to get this kind of united sort of colour scheme running through the whole of the image. But then also, and this is where I really like to start with on something like this, is I start to apply the whites and things, the highlights. So if I just, so this was on my original drawing, by the way. So the drawing you saw me shade last lesson, I just painted over it. When you do paint over the top, you don't want something that's too opaque either. So for this, for adding the background, add some water to your paint, but don't overdo it, because you don't want to completely saturate the paper. So you want something a little bit in between that. And I'll do a little wash on the side of the paper in a second. And then straight after that, and it won't take too long to dry, because acrylic paint it does dry very quickly, especially if you're in a warm sort of living room. I'll just get a little bit of the white paint I've got here, and if we look at some of the highlights that I've got in this, you can see that over here it's particularly light, and towards the back it's very light as well. So once you start applying the highlights on the blue, you start to pick things out. And you can see I've done it on this chap's head over here. But because you've got a mid-tone on the page or on the paper already, it means that those highlights are going to make the picture pop out a lot quicker. And then when you start adding the darker tones to your image, you're going to then make it really start to stand out with the contrast that you can see in this particular picture that we're looking at the moment. So you may find, if you've got like a colour background, that you need to work over the surface a few times to get a particularly strong whites if you're looking for a very strong highlight. But at the same time, when the colour is a little bit transparent, or some of the blue from underneath here comes through, it actually adds a little bit more depth to the colours that you're applying, and it kind of allows the picture knit together in different areas because you've got bits of the blue poking through there. Okay, so with mixing the paint for the background, if you're working, as most people were this morning, are working on sort of A3 size, what you do want to do is perhaps use a bigger brush. So we've got this one, which is quite large. It's a flat-ended brush or a flat brush. This is quite a big one. You could get away with using one a little bit smaller. But what you need then, I chose to do ultramarine for the main colour underneath, so that's what you can see in the wash over the whole picture. And then I mixed a little bit of white with it. Okay, so remember that the white paint is most of the time, depends on what paint you've got, will be opaque. So that obviously means you may need to add a little bit more water to your paint. Okay, and then with the flat brush you can apply the paint quite evenly like that over the top of whatever you've drawn. And it's just worth being aware that, you know, if your drawing is very pale, and you can see on my drawing, so there's the sign that says diner. I hadn't gone over that at all. I'd only sketched it out, so a lot of the clearness of the sign there has gone. I can just see it, so it doesn't matter too much. But you know, when you come down here, you can see where I was shaded. I was doing the shading last week. It shows up quite nicely, but up here it's quite faded. So you may find yourself going over it a little bit just to make things stand out. However, as somebody pointed out this morning, do you have to draw it first, then put your wash over? No, you don't. You could get your photograph and draw it on top of a wash. Obviously, you just need to make sure you've got the wash or the paper the correct size, so that then everything's going to fit in to the image. So you can see I've got quite a lot of different colours in here because I was just exploring the colours in the picture by looking really closely at it. So that this is probably going to change quite a bit as I progress. But the nice thing about acrylics is that they're brilliant for layering different colours over the top because they dry so quickly. So I just wanted to do something else as well, because often people ask me how do you blend. So I'm just going to do a quick blend. So I've got this brush here is a filbert brush. So a filbert brush, it's a bit like a flat brush. If I turn it, I'll come in a bit closer again. If I turn it to the side, it's like a flat brush. So this is my big flat brush here. Turn it to the side like that, but the end of it is rounded like that. And that's just a really good brush because it's a bit more flexible. You can do a lot more things with it as far as painting and mark making goes. So for a blend, you want to start with one colour, obviously, and go into another one. So I usually sort of, oh gosh, that's very blurry. There we go. Right, so load your brush with the colour that you want to use, apply it on to the paper, and then on your palette mix a little bit of the next colour with the paint you've just used, and next to it start putting it down and work into the colour you've just done. Okay, so it starts to blend straight away, and then get a little bit more of the next colour. So as you can see, I'm using a bit of white on here. Put it down next to it, and while the paint is damp, it will start to blend a bit more. If you've got too much paint on your brush, you can always take it off. So there you go, starting to blend a bit, and then I'll do that again now. You'll hear me washing my brush in between as well, and that's just to make sure that I'm not contaminating it with what I've done before too much. And as long as the paint's wet enough, you should be able to get a really nice smooth blend in your painting. And as I've said, acrylic paint will dry very quickly, so it's worth what I say is often is work on one area of your painting at a time. Once you've done the washes and the main colours, choose one area particularly where there's lots of blending and things going on, or mixing of colour on the surface. Work on one small area at a time. So this is why you can see that mainly on this one I've been working around this area. In fact, this chap that I've mentioned a few times, I did him all at the same sort of time, and that allowed like these different reds that I'd mixed to be able to, if I needed to, which I haven't done too much blending here, but you can blend them a little bit more as you're going along. Okay, so when I get towards the background here, I'll be able to use just mostly different blues, because in the photograph up there, look, there's lots of blues and there's a few oranges. So one of the other things to be aware of, and it's quite interesting to note, is that a lot of the picture is blue. There's lots of blues in here, but you'll notice throughout the whole of the image there's this kind of orangey brown appearing everywhere, and that is an opposite colour on the colour wheel to the blue. So it adds a little bit of contrast and a little bit more energy into the image, and draws your attention to different parts of the picture effectively as well. So it's a lot of fun to notice these sorts of things as you work. And then you've got little accents in the picture, such as the green bag that the little girl's carrying just there, and there's some other little bits of green mixed in with the brown. So the colours become harmonious as well as contrasting. But the main thing is that there's blues and oranges or orangey browns appearing within the picture, which give it this kind of more of an intensity, I suppose, when you look at it. It makes it more exciting and appealing to look at. Okay, so I'm going to continue with that this evening, playing around with the colours and the atmosphere. Try not to worry too much if your picture isn't exactly the same as what you can see in front of you. We're trying to really, this evening, we're trying to capture that sense of atmosphere within the picture. So if you've got, you know, the elements we've talked about, which is colour, tonal values, and you know, the less distinctive background and the more refined foreground in your image, then brilliant. Some of your pictures might not have all of those things in, but they should have a sense of atmospheric perspective that we've been looking at. Okay, so does anyone have any questions?
Okay, yeah, and I did answer a few questions there. Now, what I did here, and you may have just seen that this area had a few different colours underneath, which were pale, to be honest, you know, like pinks and stuff. But what I did to start with there was I applied a sort of grey, a bluey grey wash back over the top to even out the colours, but also to keep some of the colours that are underneath. So adding a little bit of water sometimes to create a little bit of transparency so that those colours underneath can come through is very effective as well. Here I've applied, where you can see me working now, I've got some shadows, obviously from the characters walking across there. And what I've done is I put down some blue, obviously, underneath, and then over the top I've used some little bits of white to soften down those shadows so they're not too dark, but have some highlights within them, if you like, as well. So where the shadows are cast, often there'll be little bits of light still hitting some of those shadows as well. You'll see me during this working back into some of the lighter areas in the picture, because I'm quite keen to make some of the highlights in the image really pop out against some of the shadows that are in here. So I'm using a very dark blue here. I mixed in some Payne's grey into my blues for the jacket on the lady just there, and here I was using some yellow ochre and some burnt umber and some white in the colours here within the skin tone. So this can be quite tricky sometimes. Often people will look at those skin tones and think they've got to be as they would think the skin tone needs to be, so and then not quite get the colour. So the important thing to do when looking at the colour within this picture is to actually try and examine that colour and think, well, is it actually what I think it is? Is it more of, has it got more of a brown sort of tinge to it? Do I need to mix other colours in together with it to create it? And that's what I've done here. And then like later on, you sort of might go off to another part of the image and then come back to it and think, I just need to do a bit more there and refine it slightly, which is exactly what happens here. So you can see me just refining the profile of the face of the lady. In the picture, the front of her face was more highlighted than the side there, so I carried out a little bit more work in there as well. I was quite pleased with how I've managed to pick up this sense of light within the picture from an early stage, and that was really working over this mid-tone colour that I put in the background, this blue ultramarine washed down over the top of the drawing that I did in lesson 5. And then it's just I've worked back into and refined the image, looked back at the shapes of the lady crossing over the road there and just tried to adjust them slightly. They're not perfect by any means, but they do still convey what the artist was doing, was conveying in the image. And it's a great way, I always say it's a great way to learn something about painting, is to actually take apart a picture like this and really examine it. It's like doing, if you like, an analysis of a picture in order to learn more about what's going on there. So now I kind of really wanted to get to the background of the image, so that we could get this sense of atmospheric perspective. So in the background there is lots of detail actually, but at the same time that detail is more, if you like, blurred or muted in there, so it's not distinctive like the figures are, but from the shapes and things, you get the suggestion of windows and cars and so forth, but less distinctive than the figures in the foreground there. So this is something I wanted to add to this image before the end of the lesson, as you know, there's limited time on these things. So here I am, and I did do in the end quite a lot of layering of the paint. The nice thing is about doing it is you can apply the brush strokes quite loosely. If you work quickly, you will find yourself applying the brush strokes nice and rapidly, and doing it a little bit quicker, working a little bit quicker forces you to keep looking quicker as well, and examining the surface and reappraising those surfaces, and at the same time not being overly precious about what you're looking at. So you can, you really start to examine things. You start to choose the colors much more quickly, and it becomes kind of a little bit more of a sketch, if you like, which is what this is. A study of an artist's work here is a kind of a sketch, and trying to sort of pull out the important things for atmospheric perspective by working into the image in this way. So there's a car just there in the background, and I work back into that. You can see I've added some of the browns. There was a kind of reddish brown that was inside the just above the seating, at least on the picture I was working from, just there. And it started to come through quite nicely, and thank you very much. And I'll see you next week.